Trevor Millar, welcome, co-founder of Ambio Life Sciences, and dare I say, guru on the area of psychedelics. It is so great to have you here, all the
Thanks,
way from.
Kylie. I definitely wouldn't use that term for myself.
Well, certainly from I think the world of psychedelics and the work that you guys are doing, I know that you bring a lot of expertise in this area, and which we're very interested in talking about today. And off the back of our conversation last week, so this is part two, obviously, in our chat about psychedelics, and we had your co-founder last week, Jonathan. And the thing that we said we wanted to actually immediately get into is this conversation around detoxing. And the process of that for you. So if it's all right with you, I'd really love to just even get straight into that, because I know you guys run some clinics. So we talk about the clinics in Mexico. Your personal experience, like how can I actually even ask you, how did you get into this personally?
Yeah, for sure. I was it took a long time, but basically it started around 2001. After 9/11, I was very distraught with the state of the world, probably 23 years old, looking for how to give back. And I was new to Vancouver, BC at the time. And Vancouver has a neighborhood called the Downtown East Side, which is notably the poorest postal code in Canada. And I just started looking at how I might be able to help out in that neighborhood. I knew I really had no skills to leverage, but I thought maybe that itself would be something beneficial, that I was kind of looking at it with fresh eyes. And turns out that was kind of true. That basically turned into about a 10-year networking and research project. And then in 2009, Ibogaine came on my radar as a way to potentially help. And from a few years later, I met Jonathan Dickinson. He was running the first Ibogaine conference I ever went to. And it was at that conference that I met a guy who became my business partner originally. And we started a business in Vancouver called Liberty Root Therapy Limited. And we could operate legally. We operated legally from 2012 through until 2017, and then Health Canada changed the regulatory status of Ibogaine. So I haven't been able to work with it there since. But yeah, essentially, to the point of detox, Ibogaine is really good at getting people off opiates and interrupting most addictions, actually. So in looking at this poorest postal code in Canada, obviously a high rate of drug use there. So this seemed like a potential answer. And yeah, we treated about 200 people in the time that we were operating in Canada. And we did do some pro bono treatments for residents of that downtown east side as well. I think we treated about 4 in total over the course of the couple of years. Because it's an interesting substance in that it's not something you want to just pluck somebody off the street, give them Ibogaine, and then drop them back on the street. There needs to be a lot of packaging done around it. So it's not quite so easy as let's just treat everybody for free. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure it remains a safe and successful treatment.
Right. So can you share with us then a little bit about that process? So you're running the clinics in Mexico now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for somebody.
Yeah. So essentially what happened is we were running in Canada legally, like I said, until 2017. Once Health Canada changed the rules, I stopped working with it there and didn't do it much for a couple of years, basically. And then I got in touch with, I was introduced to a couple who started a nonprofit that has been sending U.S. Special Forces veterans for Ibogaine treatments. So upon meeting that couple, they were very diligent in staying in touch with me, and it was clear they were looking for another Ibogaine provider to work with. So I ended up here in Tijuana because I now have 2 business partners, Jonathan and Jose. Jonathan, fellow Canadian, ran that conference that I went to. We had stayed friends since then. And then Jose is a paramedic. He had a clinic running here giving Ibogaine. and Jonathan was living in Tijuana as well. And they basically called one day and said, "Do you want to move to Tijuana? Well, we'll find a house, we'll dedicate it to veterans, and we'll take it from there." So I did that in 2021, July 2021. We moved down here, and we now have 3 houses running. So we have two facilities where we do a 5-day psycho-spiritual treatment, we call it, which is as opposed to a detox treatment. And we do have a house dedicated to detoxing as well.
So very two different things.
Interesting. Well, before we started recording, we talked about how there's detoxing from drugs and alcohol, and then there's detoxing from regular life as well.
Yeah.
The Ibogaine works very well for both of those things. And if you're not hooked on substances, the treatment's a bit easier, so less complex. So that's why we have the house dedicated to detoxing. Those are generally more complex treatments rather than just bringing somebody in for this 5-day protocol, which works great for depression, anxiety, lack of purpose, lack of meaning, traumatic brain injuries. So Ibogaine, it's the same medicine used in virtually the same way. It's just when you're detoxing somebody, you need to prepare them and get them ready a little bit more.
Okay, good. Well, then let's talk about that part where you've got the house dedicated to people who are, like you say, dealing with things like depression or anxiety or lack of purpose. And who are you like? Who is that predominant? What are you finding? Are you predominantly attracting? Like who are the kinds of people that you end up working with, and how does that process end up happening?
It's so as I said, we moved here basically to become the Ibogaine provider for this nonprofit. So the nonprofit is called Vets Incorporated. The website is vetsolutions.org. And they have raised millions of dollars to send former U.S. special operators, so like Navy SEALs, Top Gun fighter pilots, Delta Force guys, Army Rangers, MARSOC Marine guys. So the veterans will get in touch with that organization. That organization will approve them or not. If they get approved, they basically get sent to us. So the first year that we worked, we treated, I'd say probably 95% veterans, and probably 90% of those came through this nonprofit. And then I did another podcast with a gentleman by the name of Sean Ryan. He's a former Navy SEAL that has a podcast that came down to get treated as well. And he's got a big audience. So that really enabled a whole bunch of other people to be able to find us as well. Whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder and the symptoms that come with post-traumatic stress disorder, like anxiety, like depression, like lack of purpose, lack of meaning, getting easily triggered, angry, things like that. Or if you have those kind of symptoms for a different reason, maybe you're an angry person, maybe you were abused when you were a child. It seems to really hit all of those notes. It's so people find us. A lot of people have found us through that podcast, and just knowing that we are the ones that work with this nonprofit, Vets Incorporated, which has it's a fairly popular organization. I think what's interesting about our clientele is it seems to be more conservative type people, like the people that you wouldn't necessarily assume are going to turn towards psychedelics. Many of the people that we have treated have never tried a psychedelic or a drug in their life, but they've heard such good things. There's multiple guys who have spoken publicly who have fairly big followings, former soldiers, that they just kind of sing the praises of this procedure. So it's a lot of word of mouth advertising.
Mm-hmm. So if someone does come in with what you're saying, like lack of purpose and all those kind of triggered and angry and any of those things, what is it? What ends up happening on the other end? So when they come out, what are some of the things that you either that they say or that you're noticing, or what does the end game look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, for one, the other aspect of the treatments that we do is people receive coaching before and after. So
Right.
they'll have at least 2 hours of coaching prior to arrival, at least 2 hours upon departure. But yeah, the word reset comes up a lot. People feel as though a reset button has been pushed. Things that would have triggered them in the past no longer trigger them. Like a lot of these guys have really hard times in airports and crowded places like that. And, almost to the person upon departure, they're like, wow, this is the easiest travel I've ever made. Like I like, I don't feel like these psychedelic substances are bringing you some missing piece of the puzzle. It's not like you're going to take this thing, it's going to bring you a missing piece of your puzzle, and then all of a sudden life's going to work again. I think it's more like um, that as we live life, it's like we're seeing life through a filter, like a pane of glass. And as we suffer heartache, as we suffer traumas, you know, if you stub your toe, I think that pane of glass gets dirty. And it gets so dirty that we don't even recognize that it's dirty anymore. And I think the real gift of these substances, and Ibogaine in particular, is it seems to just clean that glass from the inside out so that all of a sudden you're seeing life through a clear windshield, as it were. And holy smokes, it's beautiful. And you have the capacity to recognize that again. I think that's
Yeah.
really, I think that's a common theme that people experience upon leaving
That
here.
is a really very beautiful analogy, I think, a very simplistic one, especially for somebody who wears glasses. So, no, I often have to clear the fog on my glasses,
Yeah.
here's what I hear in what you were just saying, Trevor, and I can speak from personal experience because I've done as I shared in last week, is I had a 12 years old an experience of sexual assault, and didn't at the time that it happened, I had conditioned my brain to not remember by waking up the following morning and literally having said to myself, don't just pretend nothing happened. Now, I didn't
Wow.
obviously remember that. And it wasn't until 2 years ago, actually now we're on 2004, so it was 2009, January ago, maybe go, January 2019, I had my first session of EMDR. Having
Mm.
spoken to a very dear friend of mine, ironically, in Vancouver, and we were in this middle of the conversation, and it was just kind of it was just before, yeah. So it was the year before COVID, right? And we hadn't spoken in some time, and so we got on. She's like, "How are you?" And I said, "Listen, I'm going to start the call by actually saying, rather than just automatically going, oh, I'm great, doing good, blah blah blah." I was like, "Oh man, life is fucking hard." She's laughing, and is the kind of friend that we know. Like life
Mhm.
occurs a certain way, right? And I said,
Mhm.
"Listen, I just got to tell you." I said, "I can't. There's something I can't get my head around." She's like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm, well, I don't I don't know myself as an angry person. I said, I have never ever experienced myself as being somebody who gets angry at anything, right? And suddenly I was finding myself really angry, but the at really what I would call things that should not necessarily be angry about, called when a husband wants to floss his teeth in the lounge room and I'm getting angry at him flossing his teeth. I'm like, that just kind of doesn't correlate, right? Then it was eating food, not just him, but my kids eating food. Like the noise, like somehow it was those noises which are very small and unnoticeable to most people. I'm like, I'm just getting angry. And she's like, oh my God, you need to go do this EMDR. She said, I did this 6 sessions and it was incredible, because I was doing the same. I was getting really annoyed at people that really I didn't. So that was when I just went and I said, look, I know I suspect something has happened. I said, I don't recall the detail. So immediately in that very first session, I said to him, look, I know that something's happened when I was 12. I don't know what it was. I said, anyway, he took me through the whole experience, and, without going into the detail, literally my body relived that experience in that session, and I saw everything for the first time. And, so, when you say angry, I was like, yeah, that is the anger was the very thing that started to disappear for me. Firstly, it started to arise. Firstly, it was like out of nowhere, I became somebody who was angry, and now all of a sudden it's disappeared, and it's like this whole reset. But I wanted to spotlight this, that you were talking about this, Trevor, because I think as a reset, it is invaluable, I think, for any human being. But more importantly, I think if we in society, when someone gets angry, right now, I wouldn't say that. I don't think people are necessarily taking a look at, well, what has happened for me that's having me show up really angry at things. What happens is we blame society. We blame the workplace. We blame the culture of the workplace. We blame the government. We land on all these things that are happening outside of ourselves, and then sadly, that anger never dissipates, and it only deepens. So certainly, I can speak personally on that one. I know I'm not alone on that one, but I think this value of reset, Trevor, is invaluable.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so many of the guys that we work with, just think like these guys were rewarded for their aggression when they're on the battlefield as part of the military. It's something to value, is aggression and anger and rage even at the right time. And then that's not so good once you've retired and maybe have to have a newborn baby to take care of or something like that. So yeah, most of the guys come in with big anger issues, and yeah, this Ibogaine reset seems to just get the nervous system back so it's not triggered, so it's so you've got an opportunity to see the world correctly and act appropriately.
Yeah. So can I ask you, I was talking to a friend of mine who I've done a lot of these various things with, and she'd done both. See, I personally haven't had the experience of psychedelics, which is why, was curious about having both yourself and Jonathan talk to me, so that we can kind of start to get a little bit more awareness about it. But she is somebody who's done both. She's done psychedelics, she's done, EMDR. I mean, you name it, right? So when I was talking to her about it, she said, she'd done a lot of research and looked at the, what had physically occurred for her when she did the psychedelics and what happens in the body. And she said, it's like, and I've done dry fasting numerous times. She said, it's like when you're on 3 of a dry fast. She said that because she's trying to explain to me what it feels like because I've not done it, right? She said, you know what it's like? Remember what it's like? I go, yeah, I do remember what that's like being on a dry fast. She said, it's almost like that. You know how you came out of that feeling like a reset is probably, I don't know that I used the word reset at the time, but it's almost like my body, it was a very dark place, let me tell you. It's like the periods of wanting to eat or thinking that what I needed was to put water into my mouth, and then coming out the other side was like that. Do you know? Is there anything you can comment about? Especially when the process of taking people through. I know you do the drug and that, but is there also a dietary and lifestyle and thing that comes with this?
Ibogaine itself is fairly forgiving on how you need to prepare with diet. Ayahuasca is another plant medicine that you notoriously have to do a dieta beforehand, which is no salt, no sugar, no spices for at least a week or so prior to doing ayahuasca. Ibogaine, you can basically whatever you want going into it. We ask people to fast for about 8 hours before we give them any actual medicine. But other than that, you can basically eat whatever you want going in. And then a lot of people do see changes in their diet afterwards. Like they just gravitate towards healthier things than they would have before. Um,
So what does happen in the body? Do you know what actually happens in the body with the drug itself?
we don't really know enough. It's referred to as a dirty molecule, meaning it hits multiple receptor sites. So we know it works on the serotonin system. We know it works on the dopamine system. We know it works on the opioid system. So it's doing a lot. One of the doctors that we worked with recently out of Stanford University calls it unleashes a symphony within the body. A whole bunch of different processes get activated to the point where we finished this study with Stanford University, and it's even showing traumatic brain injuries being repaired, showing up on brain scans that the injury is no longer there.
Right.
So we don't know. And then the experience is referred to as oniric or as related to dreams. It's kind of like a lucid dream type situation that people are in. Not everybody gets visions, but oftentimes people will get visions. And sometimes it's a kind of a life review, a slideshow that they see, their life from start to now kind of thing. Sometimes it's just sheer chaos, the different visions coming at a person, different faces, different patterns, different colors. Sometimes it's crystal clear visions that make total sense and, are the answer to whatever problem they've been facing. I remember one guy, he had taken many lives over the course of his career, but there was one life on this one particular operation where it was basically a standoff between this guy, some guy that was firing and trying to kill them, and then their team. And this guy took the kill shot and took care of the situation. And for some reason, he felt really guilty about that one. And it was one that just really stuck out to him. And for some reason, he couldn't shake it. So in his Ibogaine journey, this guy came to him and said, "Hey, I was trying to kill you. It's all right. You were just doing your job." So you can
Wow.
get that kind of shift in context that allows you to forgive past situations or see, maybe you were abused as a child or something like that, and you're carrying a lot of resentment around it. And then you might get, a third party point of observation on the situation, and they're like, "Oh wow, okay, mom was having a really bad day. Actually, mom was having a bad year. Okay, I see where this came from," or whatever.
Mm.
And it just
Wow.
allows that shift in context.
That is extraordinary that a drug can do that. I am blown. I mean, that blows my mind. And
Yeah.
having been in the work of, I just call it transformational work now for, a good 20 odd, 25 years, I know for myself that having gone through that particular process many times over, I think that you frame it very well about forgiveness from the perspective of looking at actually the situation from a different point of view and seeing that actually, and it was the same for me, Trevor. Like when I went through this process, I actually had to forgive myself, which was surprising for me because I was
Mhm.
a victim of an attack, right? And so, but once I released the anger towards well, it quite frankly, anybody. Point I
Mhm.
was like triggered by anything, but what
Mhm.
I what surprised me was what I didn't realize was that I was blaming myself for having been in a situation or an environment that I thought I shouldn't have been at that age. And so I didn't realize that I had been making myself wrong. So I had to forgive the 12-year-old. I didn't have to, but forgave the 12-year-old version because I was like, hold on. As a 12-year-old, Kylie, you didn't have like that. You did the best that you could have done. Like there
Yeah.
was no way out of that situation, actually. So to think that you could have, or should have done something differently, actually, no. there was no way out of that situation. So you can forgive yourself. And that, it's funny you say that, because I think, I don't know that as human beings, firstly, I think it's remarkable that a drug like Ibogaine, or any drug like that, can do that for a human being. That is like, that man's life must have been altered forever, I imagine.
Big time. Yeah.
So what has it been like for him now?
So he was in the Stanford study, this guy. So he was one of the groups that went to Stanford prior to coming to us to get brain scans and a battery of other tests. Then he came down here for Ibogaine. Then he went immediately back to Stanford. On the way down, I got a phone call from Stanford saying, this guy just lost it at the front desk at this hotel. He doesn't seem very stable at all. Are you sure we should be giving him Ibogaine? And I'm like, yes, definitely. This guy needs Ibogaine. Get him down here. So he was very tightly wound upon arrival. He had a bit of experience with psychedelics in the past, so he wasn't really nervous about the medicine itself. But yeah, the first thing that happened in his journey is his dog that had passed away 6 months before walked out of the wall and curled down next to him. And so that was a great start for him. He had that experience that I already described. He had a really beautiful journey, like kind of in the upper echelon of, these can be super challenging journeys. And he just ended up with one of the more pleasant ones. And yeah, he was very relaxed afterwards. He was one of these guys, going into the hotel, traveling was super hard for him. On the way home, he was fine. He shortly thereafter was sending photos of him at Aspen Ski Resort. He's like, I would have never been able to do this for the last 10 years because of how I'm related to crowds. And I guess somebody in the parking lot was aggressively trying to steal his parking spot. And his son, who was with him, is like, oh man, my dad is going to punch this guy out, because that was his old MO. But he was like, hey man, just take it easy. We're just out here having fun skiing. So he has seen, yeah, he's a very respected member of this community as well. So I think he sent at least 20 other people through because they saw the change in him. And yeah, his life has been entirely transformed. He doesn't hide under the coffee table when a plane flies over anymore.
Wow. Well, I mean, I just hearing those stories, I imagine, keeps you in the game very passionately. But I do want to flip over to your personal experience, and why are you here doing this work? What is it that has you continue to want to do this kind of work?
Mm-hmm. Well, in my early 20s, I discovered the field of personal transformation, and I didn't go to uni. I graduated high school, started working at a hotel, and thought maybe one day I'll go back to school, but never did. And at the same time thought, I'm going to be at least as successful as my friends who have gone to school. So I really went on a self-education process, reading hundreds of books, everything from How to Stop Worrying and Start Living to Think and Grow Rich to Tony Robbins type stuff, to reading books on Einstein and quantum mechanics and just really anything I could get my hands on. And then at a certain point, I was just hit with, well, why are you reading all these books? And the answer came back, well, I want to be happy. Okay, well then let's cut to the chase. What do all these books say about being happy? And it took a while to think about it, but the conclusion I came to was the happiest people, or at least the people that I would most want to emulate, seem to be helping a hell of a lot more people than I was at the time. So I thought that was a valid hypothesis. I'm like, it would make me feel good to truly help somebody transform and live a better life. So um, that's when I turned my attention to that neighborhood. I'm like, well, this neighborhood looks like it needs some help. Maybe I can help out down here. And that's yeah, every good thing in my life has come from that decision.
I think I know when you mentioned this initially about how old you were when you did that, I think that's a very young age to be having that inquiry with oneself. I mean, especially given that what you're saying is that you did it by reading a bunch of books and having this conversation with yourself about happiness. I mean, that in itself, I think, is quite well.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know
think I
what.
recognized that at the time. I felt very fortunate to have stumbled upon this vein of information. And I'd say the universe provided. It was a lot of coincidences, and like I for one, I got hired at a job, and when it was in the interview, the guy that hired me and I were talking about books that we'd read, and he said, "Have you ever read Tony Robbins?" And I'm like, "The guy with the teeth from the infomercials?" I'm like, "No, I haven't read any Tony Robbins," and kind of left it at that. And then this was a sales job. It was a software sales job in April of 2001. So right when the dot bomb happened, I was trying to sell technology. So I had always been told you'd be a great salesman, but then I started this job and realized I had no idea what sales was. And now that I was starting to uncover it, I went into this place of existential angst. And I'm like, man, I don't want to be a slimy salesman my whole life. So I asked this guy that hired me, I'm like, hey, can I get that Tony Robbins book from you? It was Awaken the Giant Within. And I read the first half of it, and it was like mother's milk to me, like values, beliefs, how you look at the world, like just really, really great paradigm shifter. And then just a couple I'm like halfway through this book, and I'm coming back from the beach in Vancouver, and there's a guy going through the garbage looking for bottles to return. And I said, I've got some wine bottles in the house I'll grab for you. So I went in and grabbed them. And when I came out, he said, thanks, man. And look, there's all these tapes you could have. They're all perfectly wrapped. You could record over them if you wanted. And it was the entire Tony Robbins Personal Power 30-day course.
Oh my
So,
God.
a week before that, I would have said the guy with the teeth, and instead, I'm gifted with this treasure trove of information. And I basically called in sick for the next 4 days. I had to find a Walkman. I had to buy one from Radio Shack and listen to these tapes walking around Vancouver for the next 4 days, and it was incredible and kind of changed everything. But there's been a lot of things like that, like even going from I was born into a very liberal but Christian family. Then I kind of I couldn't believe people were believing this fairy tale about Jesus in my late teens, so I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. And then yeah, just another book I was reading,
Sorry,
the
can I ask
science of.
just back on what your comment then about throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Can you explain to me what you mean
I
by
just
you?
threw all religion out. I'm like, this is a complete fairy tale.
Right.
This is I don't, how did I even believe in God? This Jesus thing, how there's so many logical inconsistencies in what this Bible is saying. Like, how do people buy this? So I just kind of became kind of atheistic after that, and just kind of
Right.
threw it all out. And then it turns out there is a baby in that bathwater. But the way I realized that was through this book, The Science of Getting Rich. There's one of the major premises of the book is there is a thinking substance that permeates the interspaces of the universe, and a thought impressed upon that substance brings about the thing thought about. So just the way that hit me that day, I'm like, well, does that sound like the all present, all knowing, all powerful God? That kind of does. So then I'm like, oh, maybe there is something religion or spirituality. And then I really dug into every religion I could get my hands on, and really just started looking for the similarities between them all, of which there's nothing but similarities between them all if you kind of get rid of all the fluff. So that really changed my life. The other, doing some of these substances that I work with, you're often brought to a sense of unity with all things. So 5-MeO-DMT is a compound that I find can really bring people into that non-dualistic type state where you feel yourself literally one with everything in the universe. And, if you go with an insight like that and carry it forth logically, it brings you to things like, well, if anybody is suffering, then I am suffering. If we're all one thing, then if there's suffering in the universe, then there is suffering within me as well. So that just really reoriented me as well. All right, well, what can I do to help? I'm pretty good. I suffer less than the average human being, I suppose, but what can I do to help other people experience this?
Wow. Well, a couple of things. So, firstly, that pulling out Tony Robbins out of that garbage bin. I mean, immediately I mean, it's almost the irony of it. Given that you just prior to that being given the book and started the thinking, the reading about that. I mean, I did my first experience of Tony September last year.
Nice.
And up until that point, I was a bit like you, your version of the big teeth. My version was it's all hyped up, people jumping in the room, dancing on top of ceilings kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, a dear friend gifted me a ticket to go with her, and at a very reasonable price, which I don't think back in the days, my experience was you had to pay something like $5,000 to go see Tony Robbins live. She's like, oh, we've got this ticket, and we've had it, so you're welcome to have it for, ridiculous cheap price. And I went, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do this thing. Seriously, Trevor, I'm bracing myself to go into this thing just going, oh, my God, what am I going to have to deal with? AKA, here's this person who on the external looks like she's this complete extrovert, whereas deep inside, I'm like petrified of being attacked by anybody. And I'm walking into this thing, there's like 10,000 people. What am I going to get? What have I got myself into, right? Anyway, and at the same time having those thoughts, I'd done enough work that I could separate myself from the thought, from the experience. So I was like, at the same time, I was also very excited. So I had my first experience of him on doing the Unleash the Power Within, and I was like,
nice.
Oh, is this what you mean by becoming evangelistic? Like, you're like, oh my God, when am I going to do the next Tony Robbins thing? This was just, I'm a science junkie, right? So I'm actually by skill set, I started out in research. So I'm a big lover of research, right? So the thing that I'm fascinated the most, and I'm certified as a neuroscience coach, and what I loved about him is his neuro-linguistic programming in literally everything that came out of his mouth. She's like, he's doing that intentionally. And I went, this guy's just so Tony, well done, buddy. So
we love you, Tony.
Oh, we love you, Tony. But the thing I want to bring up about what you shared, Trevor, was the thing that I noticed in my experience of what he said, and this is a very simplistic view, is that you get whatever you look for, and the moment that you're in touch with your true humanity, which let's say is to be of service to and be of one with the world, that the moment you gave yourself over to that guy with those offering the bottles, that was that was the universe there, right? Tony coming, Tony flying in on that street, giving you your audio.
Yeah. Wow. Wild, right?
That's wild.
Yeah, the invisible hands that seem to orchestrate things at the right times.
Well done you for being the cause of that. And the other one I wanted to pull out was your guy who, when you were in the software company, he's like, read that. I mean, you can just start to see all those little white lights coming in,
He was, that was a great, that was great for both of us. Him, the guy that hired me, and I became good friends, and we both really dove deep on kind of a personal development path together at that time.
Mm.
And it was wild. So we had plenty of books to share back and forth. Yeah, it all seems so astounding and miraculous. And yeah, why aren't more people learning about this? And then nobody does want to hear about it once you learn something significant like that. That was definitely near my evangelical stage around this stuff. The world isn't what we think it is. We've got to, wake up. But yeah, I'm glad that happened in my 20s.
September 11, I imagine that would have been really a paradoxical kind of world. I mean,
Yeah.
geez. Yeah, look, thank you so much for joining us today. Honestly, Trevor, I could talk to you forever. But so many extraordinary pieces of value in what you've shared with us today on many different levels. So, firstly, thank you, and thank you for sharing about your journey. I
Thank
do
you.
want to be able to highlight to people how they can actually connect and find out more about Ibogaine and Ambio Life Sciences. What is the
Yeah.
best place for people to connect with you guys?
Yeah, our website is www.ambio.life, Life.
Oh, that's
I have
easy.
an Instagram account is the only social media I'm on. It is uh, psychedelic underscore provider is my name on Instagram. And then Ambio has an Instagram page as well at Ambio Life Sciences.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, firstly, ambio.life, I think that's nice and simple, which is great. But I do recommend that you, those of you who haven't listened to last week's episode, go back and listen to Jonathan's story as well. But to definitely follow Ambio Life Sciences on Instagram. I mean, it's certainly where I first discovered you, Trevor, and what you were doing. And I think my fascination with what you were talking about in your, again, my lover of science, right, and the stats and what you were saying. But really, more importantly, I was deeply moved by the work that you were doing with the part of a community who I imagine who have gone through some very, very, very difficult things. But the fact that you were taking it out of doing it in that community in and of itself, but then you're branching out into humanity to really provide this kind of healing is just remarkable. So thank you again for being here and sharing your story. Thank you for what you're
Thank
doing.
you,
And
Kylie.
I can't wait to get to Mexico.
Yeah, come on down.
Yeah, well, we'll see you soon.
Okay, take care.